The sun shimmered off the lake's surface, sparkling like scattered diamonds, but Jake barely noticed. His focus was on the small wooden dock he had built last summer, a quiet escape from the chaos of city life. That calm, however, was shattered the moment the HOA committee showed up, armed with clipboards and stern expressions. "Mr. Jake, this dock is in violation of HOA regulations," Karen, the leader, announced, her voice sharp and commanding. "You must remove it immediately or face hefty fines." Jake blinked, stunned. He had followed every regulation, submitted every form, and even consulted local authorities before placing the dock. He could feel his heart rate rising, not from fear, but from the absurdity of the situation. As the committee surrounded him, pointing fingers and muttering complaints, Jake's mind raced. There was more to the story than they realized. His grandfather had left him not just the cabin, but ownership of the entire waterway surrounding it. Every lake, river, and stream that these HOA bullies thought they controlled was technically under Jake's authority. The sunlight reflected off the water, glinting like a secret waiting to be revealed. Jake straightened his shoulders, calm despite the tension. This confrontation would not go the way Karen imagined, but first, he needed them to truly understand who held the real power. Karen's eyes narrowed as she scanned the dock, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This is unacceptable. You can't just—" she started. But Jake interrupted with a calm, almost amused tone. "Actually, Karen," he said, holding up a worn leather folder, "you might want to read this before making any further threats." The HOA committee froze. The papers inside were official deeds and waterway rights, notarized and stamped decades ago. Every river, every lake, every dock in the surrounding counties, technically, they were all under Jake's ownership. Karen's face shifted from confidence to disbelief, and her assistants whispered anxiously among themselves. You can't own all of this," Karen stammered, pointing at the sparkling lake. "It's public property. It's—" Jake raised a hand to silence her. "I'm afraid the law disagrees," he said. "Everything here, including this dock, falls under my grandfather's legacy. I suggest we resolve this peacefully." The committee members exchanged nervous glances. For the first time, their authority felt meaningless. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible, as the calm lake mirrored their shock. Jake's mind, however, was already planning the next move. If they thought intimidation would work, they were about to learn that power could come in the quietest, most unexpected forms. The sunlight bounced off the water, reflecting in Karen's wide eyes, as if the lake itself was daring her to challenge him further. Jake's lips curled into a small, confident smile. He had waited a long time for this moment. Karen's mouth opened, closed, and opened again as she tried to grasp the papers in Jake's hands. The committee's confidence had crumbled, replaced by confusion and tension. But Jake wasn't just showing them paperwork. He was sending a message, a quiet, undeniable message of control. "I know why you're here," Jake said, stepping forward, his gaze steady. "You think you can bully me into compliance, make me remove a dock, threaten fines, and assert dominance. But this isn't your waterway to control." Karen snapped back, her voice trembling. "We are the HOA. We enforce rules. You can't just—" Jake held up a finger, silencing her again. "Actually, I can, and I will. But I'm not interested in conflict for the sake of conflict. Let me show you exactly who owns what here." He opened his folder, spreading maps and documents across the porch railing. Each map highlighted the waterways, the lakes, and the rivers he now legally controlled. Every dock, every stretch of lakefront, every tributary, they were under his authority. Karen's eyes widened as reality sank in. The assistants fidgeted nervously, whispering among themselves. This wasn't supposed to happen. The plan they had rehearsed, the intimidation tactics, they all fell apart under the weight of legal truth. Jake's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with their rising panic. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't yell. He let the papers, the evidence, and the undeniable power he wielded do all the talking. And in that moment, the lake wasn't just water. It was a reflection of his authority, shining quietly but unmistakably. Karen's hands trembled as she glanced at the spread of documents and maps on the railing. Her perfectly rehearsed intimidation had collapsed into nothingness. The assistants muttered anxiously, their confident postures replaced by uncertainty. Jake stood calmly, almost serene, his eyes reflecting the glimmering lake behind him. You can't possibly control all of this," Karen finally exclaimed, her voice quivering. "This is outrageous. The HOA has regulations. You can't just—" Jake cut her off with a gentle yet firm voice. "I've spent my life learning the laws, following every rule, and respecting this land. Your regulations don't negate decades of legal ownership. The docks, the waterways, every inch of this lake. My grandfather ensured it belongs to me." A stunned silence fell over the group. The gentle waves lapping against the dock seemed louder now, echoing the reality of their lost authority. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for allies or excuses, but none existed. Then, without warning, one of the assistants accidentally dropped a clipboard into the water. The splash was symbolic, breaking the tension with sudden clarity. They were powerless. Jake smiled faintly, but his calm exterior hid the satisfaction building within. He had proven his point without raising a finger, yet the humiliation for the HOA was unmistakable. The sunlight reflected on the documents and water alike, emphasizing the reality they could no longer ignore. This was more than a confrontation. It was a lesson in patience, strategy, and unshakable authority. Karen's flustered expressions told Jake one thing clearly. They had underestimated him, and the consequences would unfold slowly but surely. Karen's face was a storm of anger and disbelief, but Jake remained calm, almost unbothered. He knew that true power didn't need to shout. It only needed patience and precision. Slowly, he closed the folder and looked directly at her. "Since you're so eager to enforce rules," Jake said gently, "let's ensure every regulation is applied fairly, including those that concern my properties." The assistants froze. Karen blinked rapidly, trying to find a way to regain control, but her usual threats fell flat. Every fine, every complaint she had prepared now faced the scrutiny of law, and Jake's ownership rendered them meaningless. He smiled faintly, imagining their frustration. Every HOA meeting, every attempt to intimidate residents, all of it now backfired. Jake had waited years to exercise restraint, letting them believe they held power. But patience was part of his strategy. Every action now subtly reminded them who really controlled the waterways. The committee tried to argue, to assert some semblance of authority, but their words fell like whispers against a stone wall. Jake's calm explanations, supported by precise legal documents, made their resistance futile. As the sun dipped slightly toward the horizon, the lake shimmered with a serene glow. The HOA had come with arrogance, but they left with humility and a quiet realization. They were dealing with someone who understood both patience and strategy. Jake's quiet revenge was more effective than any loud confrontation. It left them powerless, flustered, and carefully reconsidering every move they would make in the future. Karen's frustration had reached a boiling point. She tugged at her perfectly styled hair, scanning the lake with desperation. The calm confidence in Jake's eyes was infuriating. He didn't even need to raise his voice, yet he dominated the confrontation entirely. "Listen," she snapped, trying one last time to assert authority. "You can't just ignore the HO. We have rules. You'll regret this." Jake's gaze remained steady, almost compassionate. "Karen, I don't intend to fight unnecessarily, but every action you take against me must follow the law, and I've ensured that every regulation you try to enforce falls under my ownership." Karen's hands shook as she realized her final attempts at intimidation were pointless. The other assistants fidgeted nervously, avoiding eye contact. Every plan they had rehearsed to pressure Jake was now rendered meaningless. Then Jake leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to create tension. "There's one thing you could do, though. Prove to me you can act fairly. Resolve disputes respectfully. Otherwise, I suggest you reconsider every action you take from here on out." The words hit like a calm yet unstoppable wave. Karen's face betrayed panic beneath her professional facade. She had underestimated Jake, mistaking silence for weakness. The lake sparkled behind him, reflecting his quiet authority, a force more powerful than anger, fines, or threats. For the HOA, this was the beginning of understanding that the true control lay not in intimidation, but in knowledge, patience, and strategy. Jake's calm demeanor left them at the edge of a revelation. They were outmatched, outwitted, and the final act was approaching. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson. Karen and her assistants stood silently, their arrogance replaced with quiet humiliation. Every tactic they had brought to intimidate Jake had failed, and the reality of their powerlessness settled in like the evening mist. Jake folded the final documents and smiled faintly. "I hope this clarifies everything," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The dock, the waterways, the lands, they all fall under my grandfather's legacy. And while I believe in community, I will always protect what is rightfully mine." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, a mix of anger and resignation. She glanced at her team, who avoided her gaze, realizing the magnitude of their defeat. Every plan, every threat, they had underestimated Jake, and now the consequences were clear. Jake stepped onto the dock, feeling the smooth wood under his feet. The water lapped gently, as if acknowledging the balance restored. The HOA had learned a lesson without a single loud argument. Patience, preparation, and knowledge had won. He turned to the committee one last time. "Let's ensure future disputes are handled with respect and fairness," he said. "The days of intimidation are over." The committee muttered a quiet agreement, defeated but wiser. Jake smiled, knowing the calm strength of his approach had spoken louder than any threat ever could. The lake reflected not just the sunset, but the undeniable truth. Power, when used wisely, need not shout. It commands quietly. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.